Hi folks, welcome back to the Hoard. So as I mentioned in my last video, I was out looking for an old and I was looking for parts for that sprayer engine, and I got into an old shed that I haven't been in, God, since I moved it here, and I never went into it after moving here, so that's 20 years ago, and God knows when I loaded it up. Poor truck. And it's just kind of interesting. You get such a thing, and you realize that you put stuff away, and it could be somewhat of a time capsule of you know, where you used to be, or what you used to do, or where you used to go, and so forth. Like I made this toolbox back in high school, right? So we're talking 74 time frame, 75 time frame. In it, I found a couple of notes from old girlfriends, and I don't think we need to go into the details here. But the interesting thing is the date, right? This is in March of 76, and this guy here, this was a college girlfriend. This is 1 year later, April or March of 77. So yeah, it was kind of interesting finding them and giving them a quick browse. I built this. This was a neon light flasher back from high school. This was from, my grandmother had a bungalow in tool steel tempered. Wonder where it was made. Had a bungalow in Goshen, New York. I don't know if you guys could see that. Maybe you can see it better than I can. And I was just thinking about her. My grandmother, the grandmother with the bungalow in Goshen, New York, she was a seamstress, and my grandfather was a barber. And they had a house in Brooklyn, in Bay Ridge. I was born in Bay Ridge Hospital, to anybody from the East Coast, Brooklyn. Anyway, they had the place in Brooklyn. She was a seamstress. My grandfather was a barber. He inherited the barber business down in Little Italy, Broad Street. He inherited that from his parents. My grandfather had polio as a kid, so he wasn't eligible to serve in any of the wars. My grandfather, unfortunately, was not a healthy man. And so my grandmother, her first job was really sewing uniforms and all from the war, from I believe the Second World War, and that's where she learned to be a seamstress, and she did that until she got into her 60s, where she had trouble with her heart and no longer. My grandfather was a smoker and had polio. He was not a healthy man. Fortunately, he died young. He was only 58, my age. He died at my age. But they had this bungalow in Goshen, New York, and that's where the can opener is from. So, I mean, that kind of stuff is interesting. I also ran across, while I was digging through, like, old projects. I built this back in high school. I mean, unfortunately, it's deteriorated, but, or actually college, I built this. I think I was a freshman in college. It's a power supply, and what this is a PNP transistor, TO3 case. What you do is start on top of the transistor. What is that? The collector with positive. You run the base, and depending on how much more positive you make the base, you actually allow current to flow through. So, and the emitter is grounded. So, nice simple power supply. This was an amplifier I built. The amplifier came from somewhere else, and you can see things have been living in there. And I just put the box around it. How's that for an old radio? Helicrafters. Or this one. This is an old Delmonico. This was from my wife's grandfather. So it's just interesting. You know, it's weird. It's like everything is kind of created or for humans or animals born, and you start your timeline. And your timeline, you know, starts at 0 and your parents are taking care of you. Then you got the school timeline, gradually the college and meeting people timeline, or the work and meeting people timeline, or the military and meeting people timeline, or whatever your story is after you finish your school timeline. And then your timeline kind of intersects with other people. You know, then gradually some timelines end. Unfortunately, our grandparents, you know, get old and they finish their days, and unfortunately our parents get old and they finish their days, and unfortunately we get old and we finish our days. But like finding those notes from old relationships, they're just interesting. Reading the high school one about my girlfriend at the time was having some issue with her parents, so reading that was kind of interesting. And then just 1 year later, it was I was away at college, and the relationship with the girl then was just so completely different. She sent me that note. I guess we were on spring break or something, and it's a note saying how you know, she missed us being together. You know, when you're in college, you basically spend about 15 to 20 hours a week in class, depending on if you have to take labs or not. And other than that, I mean, hopefully you spend some time studying, so you're not wasting your money, your parents' money, your scholarship money, or wherever the money's coming from to pay for college, right? So hopefully you spend some time studying. But when you're away at college, especially if you're away at college, it's the first time you could really have those relationships without the prying eyes of sisters and brothers and everything else. It's when you could really get involved. And I don't mean you know, getting all into the bump nasty, though obviously that could be part of it. But I mean, you know, you can really spend some time and get to know another person without having, you know, oh, it's 9 o'clock, time to go home, or you know, got to go cut the lawn now, or any of that other stuff. It's really the college time is when you really have time for you and the girlfriend, depending, you know, I worked when I was in college, so that took a little bit of time. And, you know, I wasn't a rocket scientist for a student, so I actually had to study a little bit. You know, there's some folks who seem to be able to get through college without ever lifting a finger. Anyway, it was interesting, kind of finding the time capsule. I have my grandfather's old toolbox, my father's old toolbox. He was a tile layer. And he used to make the kind of bathrooms that had masonry in them. You know, your basic bathroom back then had about a ton of masonry and tile and so forth in it. I know, because I tore one out and I had to pay to get rid of all the stuff in it. So just think about the amount of labor it takes to haul a ton of sand and cement and tile, and then, you know, mixing up the sand and cement, you know, putting wire mesh on the walls, and then smearing the base coat, and then on and on. So you just realize what it took for him to do what he did for a living. Anyway, I have his old toolbox, and I just found that old toolbox. I'm going to get it up in the attic here, and hopefully many years from now, when I wrap things up, my sons will discover those toolboxes, and find it interesting. I'll have to leave a note behind. My grandfather didn't leave a note behind in his toolbox, but he had that toolbox with him his last day of work, which was back in 1968, and he left an old newspaper in there, which is kind of an interesting time piece from 1968. My grandfather used to read the Italian newspaper that he used to get down there in Brooklyn. My paternal grandparents were from Bay Ridge also, Bay Ridge, Brooklyn. So they had a house there. And then they also had a house, but it was in Goshen, Connecticut, not Goshen, New York, a summer house. Interesting, he was a tile layer, my grandfather, and my grandmother was a seamstress during the war, and then she went into banking. She was a clerk at a bank, not a teller. She was one of the people in the back who kept the books. That was back before computers kept the books. She had good penmanship, and she was good with math, so they loved her in the bank. She worked for Chase Manhattan. Morgan Guaranteed Trust, and God knows who they've merged with, and who else they're with. So, the time capsule of my shed. Now I got to figure out. Now the shed's collapsed, and I got all this crap out of there, where to put it, so that it all just doesn't go to heck. Right? These radios. It's bad enough they've gotten damaged as they've already gotten. I really need to get them someplace safe. If anybody has a need for some of the outboard stuff, let me know. Maybe we can make arrangements. The problem with a lot of this stuff is the postage is just crazy. I mean, if somebody was dying for that outboard, and they gave me a little more than scrap for it, and I say, oh great. But then it's going to cost like 10 times that to mail it somewhere. That's what makes life difficult. Anyway, folks, I want to thank you all for watching and commenting and subscribing. Remember to keep your feet down, keep your head up, and please get out there and enjoy all your days. Make sure you have fun. Bye now, folks.